Okay, hello everyone. Today we have a wonderful guest by the name of Robert Kramer. He was a professor at the University of Budapest, Corvinus, and he taught Rankian psychology at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest as well. And he's had also some teaching positions at George Washington University, specifically along the lines of leadership and Rankian psychology. Um, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Ernest.
Yes. And in particular, I reached out to Robert because of my own personal interest in Otto Rank, and to see a book published about Rank in 2025, 2026 was quite a surprise for me. Um, what do you think? Well, in general, I'm curious about why you decided to write this book and what. Yes, of course, I too have a copy right here.
It is
Um,
Otto Rank and the Creation of Modern Psychotherapy came out just 6 months ago
yes,
in the US by Oxford University Press.
yes, there you go. And I enjoyed reading it. I have had the full sweep, and we do encourage you to get a copy. It's on Amazon right now, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yes, I think I got my copy from
Yeah,
Amazon.
yeah, sure.
And I've also had the pleasure of reading like not the auto, but the biography of Otto Rank, and I noticed that you had a specific focus on more the historical context as opposed to the the details of Otto Rank and his life, and you tied it into sort of the Freudian the contention there. Um, was that a motivation for writing the book? Um,
Well, I wrote the book because I've been trying to make sense of Otto Rank for about 40 years. I think it was 1985 when I first met uh, someone who became a very close friend, E. James Lieberman, the biographer of Rank. I met him in Washington at a talk, and became very interested in rock. And then we became friends, and later we collaborated on publishing the letters between Sigmund Freud and Otto Rank that came out in 2012
hmm
by
hmm
Johns Hopkins University Press. So that one's also available on Amazon if you want
Right.
to get it.
Yes.
And
And
then and earlier than that, in 1996, I published a collection of Rank's American lectures by Princeton University Press. These are talks that he gave after he left Vienna in a very, very painful dispute and separation from Freud in 1920. Between 1924 and 1926, he was sort of half in and half out. By 26, he had moved to Paris with his wife and daughter and
hmm
completely uh, uh, turned against Freud's psychoanalysis, which he thought was harmful.
yes,
He thought it was
counterproductive. Yeah.
uh, very destructive, and
hmm
many people were being hurt by psychoanalysis, and even after that, and could continue today to be hurt by it. There are some practitioners of psychoanalysis that have changed their practice, make it much closer to the way that Otto Rank was proposing in the mid late 1920s. So I can't conclusively say that if you go to a psychoanalyst in Japan, let's say, or anywhere else in the world, US, Europe,
hmm
the country, that you will be harmed. I'm not going to say that, but I'm going to say that it can be harmful to you.
Yes. Yes.
And you may, in fact, um, be disregarded and dismissed and dehumanized by the therapeutic process. So there are many, many other therapeutic models that are consistently more valuable, more helpful, more healing than psychoanalysis. And
Yeah,
I recommend those highly for those
right.
who want to talk to somebody who is willing to listen to their psychological suffering.
Yes, I really hope we can get into that. Um, particular, you mentioned that you've been trying to make sense of rank for a few decades, which meant you met Lieberman a few decades ago, and in particular, there's a you opened the book with a quote from Phoebe Crosby, which I resonated with me quite strongly. The idea that Rank's own writings are still an unknown language. Never mind, he changed me if his writings don't. And his changing me was from black to red, from ink to blood. And he says, from trying to work things out intellectually to giving myself more to feeling. So he won't mind if I can't read him. And if Rank were to read that, I can't help but imagine that he would very much agree, his emphasis on the lived experience and so on.
Yeah. So he introduced um, the strange idea that maybe there is a relationship between the therapist and the client, and that in that experience
Hmm.
of mutual uh, acceptance and empathy and being authentic, you could find uh, healing. He introduced that idea. Now, you would think this is obvious. You would think that all the psychoanalysts were doing that, but that's not true. They
Right.
weren't. They were not present in the room. In other words, physically present, but not engaged, not connected emotionally to the suffering of the client, and not listening to the feelings.
Well, when you pointed out the metaphor of the surgeon, the analytical lens that in your own book you said Freud uses to when he interacts with his clients, and I couldn't help but also feeling that to be a good therapist, perhaps, and I have no therapeutic training, but there's a certain risk involved. Like you have to risk yourself being transformed by your patients, perhaps, and maybe that is also somewhat terrifying, I could imagine.
It's Freud was very clear that he had to stay emotionally distant, or at least in his papers, which he published. He urged all the psychoanalysts not to show any emotional um, signals to the patient. Just be, as he said, consider yourself a surgeon operating on a body. You
Hmm.
know, surgeons really are taught in medical school that they have to keep their feelings very separate from the
Hmm.
practice of surgery because they might be too emotionally involved. And there's a lot of pain that takes place in surgery. And so the surgeon has to be, and this is still taught in medical schools, emotionally distant. But
Hmm.
Freud said this was the role of the therapist too.
Hmm.
Now, in practice, he didn't do that.
Hmm.
So there's a public Freud who said, keep your emotions out to the analyst. But in practice, he was making jokes. He lit cigars when he had a good interpretation. He invited some patients to dinner. He gave some money if they needed it. He gossiped
Hmm.
during the hour. And this is now recorded by reports of patients who visited Freud. So it's a paradox that, on the one hand, for the public face of psychoanalysis, he said, you can't be human when you practice this. But in the privacy of his own consulting room, he was funny. He um, liked some patients and told them that. He did dislike other patients and told them that. He,
Hmm.
he took out from his collection of of sculptures, little sculptures that he had all throughout his office, and he would show them to his patients. In other words, he acted like a human being most of the time to patients, not always. To some of them, he really disliked and would barely say anything.
Hmm.
But because he published what he did, all the analysts followed that because they didn't know what he was doing in private.
Right, right. And would you say this is somewhat tied into at least Freud's attempt, and I at the very least, we have to credit him for making it. You mentioned something along the lines of the psychoanalytic hour, the structure itself perhaps being credited to Freud, but the content perhaps is more Rankian today.
That's right, it is. So
Yes.
he created the one thing that he did create was the analytic hour. It was basically it's 50 minutes, not even an hour, because he needed 10 minutes to take a break before he sat down. You have to go to the bathroom, anyway.
Yes.
So the analytic hour is always 50 minutes, and he invented that.
Hmm.
But the way it's practiced today, except for a few really orthodox, rigid Freudians in Manhattan, is much more Rankian than it is Freudian.
Yes. Yes. Um, this notion of relationship, I'm very curious about it. And I'm aware that there's an idea that you have the relationship between the patient and the psychotherapist. But
Mhm.
within rank, there's also a lot of relational thinking within the individual as well, whether that be, the certain tensions that he talks about, life fair, death fair, eros agape, and so on and so forth. Would you credit rank with also like moving away from sort of these kind of deterministic drive ideas? And would you go as far as to also credit him with this relational view of even the individual?
Well, he introduced the idea of relationship. There
Yes.
was no relationship taking place in psychoanalysis. And even today,
Hmm.
they resisted. What was happening was called transference.
Hmm.
So Freud declared that the feelings of patients were not real in the analytic hour. They were transferred from the past, transferred from feelings that the patients had with their
Brahman.
parents,
Yeah.
with their siblings, with other important figures in their lives. And therefore, it was unreal.
Hmm.
And so Rank was the first person in psychoanalysis in the mid 1920s already to say, wait a minute, there are real feelings taking place. And not only is the patient experiencing something real in this relationship, but I am too, as the analyst. We're
Hmm.
having a relationship together. We're having an encounter, and
Hmm.
it's not just transference. He saw transference, which does exist, but he always wanted to reduce it to absolute minimum. In fact, he wanted to eliminate it to the extent that he could because he thought that the healing did not take place from patients transferring feelings they held in the past onto him. That's not a way to get better.
All right.
The healing took place when there was an authentic encounter
In the
where
moment.
both were engaged, both took risks, both could be changed as a result, and both were creative
All right.
forces. So
Right.
no one in psychoanalysis had that idea. And even today, it's not accepted in any psychoanalytic institute that I know of, that the patient has creative life force and that the
Right.
analyst has a creative life force, and they are creating and recreating each other all the time through the conversation and the feelings that they share with each other.
Well, as you speak, many, many, many ideas come to mind, and some of them, of course, include, um, well, along the lines of the notion of transference. There's you make a radical statement, which is Rank's statement, of course, is the idea that even neuroses can be seen as creative products, creative byproducts. And I don't know how acceptable that might be even today. And
It's
even
not accepted by any psychoanalyst today, as far as I know. I don't know the whole literature, but I know a considerable part of it. They just cannot conceive of anybody coming to visit them who has a creative life force that
Mhm.
is their responsibility to draw out.
Mm,
So
mhm,
Ron said, I absolutely sense, because human beings tap into the creative energies of the universe, he even said,
mhm,
that both the patient and the therapist create and recreate each other and themselves throughout the whole process. And that's what makes it so exciting, because it's like going to an artist to get therapy, and
right.
the artist is painting you or sculpting you, and you as the patient are doing the same, even though you don't have maybe the same strong creative energies that the analyst has. But
Yes.
it's creative experience that cannot be predicted and cannot be systematized or, or you know captured in three or four or five different steps.
Right.
It's always spontaneous and it's always creative, because the
Yes.
life force is in all of us,
Right.
the
Right.
creative life force.
I do wanna get to that and have that conversation with you. But before we do that, on more like the notion of counter will. As I was reading your book, I couldn't help but have the idea that if anything is being counter willed, it's the will of the excessively um, constraining therapist himself. If anybody's is being counter-willed, it's that precisely. And the expression from the side of the patient is simply will, create the creative will
Right.
itself, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So in every therapy that I know of, and I've talked to therapists who agree with this, there was always what they call resistance.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
Resistance. You know, I'm there, I'm listening deeply, I'm giving interpretations, I'm helping the patient articulate what's going on, I'm giving them vocabulary, and they resist. They don't want to accept it. They turn against me. They get angry at me.
mhm.
They um, dismiss me. They minimize me. Boy, that's hard to take. That's hard to take. So what did Freud? Freud saw that, of course. All the analysts see that, and they said that's that's a derivative of the death
Instinct. Yeah.
instinct.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
death instinct. So Freud came up with the idea that there is a death instinct, that people want to hurt themselves. Well, and so when they resist
hmm
the interpretations of the analyst, that's an expression of their destructive, their death drive. They
hmm
want to commit suicide, and
hmm
therefore he excused the failures of the psychoanalysts, which were many and continue to be many. It is not a therapy that produces people like Phoebe Crosby, who you quoted at the beginning. They have many, many more failures, let's call it, than successes. So Freud rationalized the refusal of patients to accept his interpretations as resistance to the truth, resistance to all the dark and murderous drives that are inside of them,
Right.
which
Right.
are destroying them. And Rank said, "This is absurd. This shows no respect for the dignity, the humanity of the person that you are trying to help." And Rank was the first person. Now there are some analysts who accept this now, but it's still a very small percentage. Rank said, that's an expression of the creative life force that's coming out, and I want to encourage it. I
Hmm.
like it
Hmm.
when the patient disagrees with me or gets angry with me. I like it because that is I am affirming their life force. He
Yes.
called that counter will. Counter
The
will is the same sort of will that 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds show their parents.
right, right, right. Well, the point, the example that really was fascinating for me, especially in the book as well, was it Ananian's lover, was it? The gentleman Taft? Was it Jesse Taft? What is that guy? His name. He
Henry
said,
Miller.
right, Henry Miller, he
Henry,
had one session with Rank and they had one
right, right.
tussle, and that's exactly what he needed. And that was that.
Exactly what he needed.
Right.
And he was happy, he was thrilled, and the rest of his life, he said, that was the best therapy I've ever had. And it was only about an hour or so.
Yeah.
And I felt so liberated. I felt my energy was so powerful in the room that I dominated Rank. He says, I won. I had a
Yes.
victory over Rank.
Yes.
And Rank told Nan afterwards, that's what I like. I like the patient winning over me because they then uh, can take this life force and energy out into the rest of the world and do the same thing and be strong and powerful.
Yes.
And
In listening
so
to you
it's
speak,
and be,
go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
I
No,
was saying, in
please go
listening
ahead.
to you speak, I can't help but feel as though you like I wouldn't be surprised if in the distant future, I don't know, that you put out another book where you're proposing something more prescriptive with regards to contemporary psychiatry, psychology, about sort of what an ideal relationship might be. I know Rank would probably not doesn't fit as easily into these sort of steps and so on, but um you know, I see it almost as though the best therapy is almost like a friend, a good friend, a creative friend who,
Yeah.
yeah, um, yeah, maybe, okay, so there's an introduction because if you don't mind, I'd like to sort of talk about early rank, and then we can kind of build up from there, maybe. Um, so I think. It's Anna Freud, the daughter of Freud, that I think gave a really good description of young Rank, and this is from your colleague's book that you worked with in publishing the letters, and she says I'll be brief, but she says it's little wonder that Rank became the psychologist of the will and of the creative will at that. Rank dared to express his awareness that not everything in human life is predictable on the basis of the knowledge of an individual's past history, as Freud had taught. For an individual is unique. For who would have guessed that Rank himself, at the age of 20, with no academic training at the time, could have written a treatise about the psychology of the artist based on his readings of Freud's work? So, in seeing this, he's extremely precocious, right? I'm aware he goes as far as to say, I bathed in Nietzsche's genius, and it gave me this bulletproof skin. And he'd read Schopenhauer at a young age, and and all of that. This is clearly an extremely unique individual, right? And and his first manuscript is The Artist, right? And his magnus opus is also Art and Artist. So there's a through line clearly. We know what Rank is about from a very early age. Um, if you could speak to that, if you could enlighten me as to what you think this formative period was when he was writing his diary, how, it was kind of he went through this apprenticeship period with Freud, and then he comes back out the other side with this developed framework. And if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, as you pointed out, it's obvious that he identified with artists from a very, very early age. He was born into a poor family. He didn't even go to high school
Hmm.
before he entered Freud's circle. He
Hmm.
was I believe he was working as a machinist
Yes,
in a
yes, yes.
glass blower shop, although that's a little vague because I don't think our information is all that good when it comes to his early years. But he read voluminously. He read everything, even though he didn't hadn't been to high school. He
Yes.
was reading, as you point out, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche. He read Kierkegaard at the age of 19.
Yeah.
Kierkegaard is the founder or the father of existential philosophy. Freud never heard the name Kierkegaard, which is astonishing, but you will not find a single reference
Yeah.
to Kierkegaard in any of Freud's writings.
Yeah.
So here's a highly intelligent, intellectual young man, maybe your age. How old are you? 18 or 19 when he was uh, studying all these books that he took out of the library, the Viennese library, because he didn't have money to buy any books. He was borrowing from the library. And somehow he managed to create himself. In other words, give birth to himself during these years and he identified himself as an artist. He
Hmm.
even wrote plays,
Right.
none of
Right.
which seems to have survived, but he also wrote poetry. Some of his poems are in his papers. And then one day he visited his family physician, Dr. Alfred Adler, because Rank had been suffering some lung problems.
Hmm.
Adler was so impressed by this. I guess he was 19, 18, 19, 20 at the time. He was so impressed when Rank was chatting with him in the examining room about books and music and art that he
Hmm.
said, I'd like to give you some books and tell me what you think about them. And so Adler lent him Freud's
Interpretation.
book.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Interpretation of Dreams and Studies on Hysteria.
Mhm.
I think those were the two, and there might have been something else. Certainly
Mm.
those two. And uh, Rank read everything completely and was totally blown away by Freud. Freud was a genius as a writer. So you have to
Mhm.
understand Freud is not an insignificant figure, even though his therapeutic process is harmful to people, and many of his ideas are actually harmful. But as a writer, he's unsurpassed in German literature,
I see.
probably next to Goethe as a magnificent writer. So Rank was totally absorbed, and within a few months, he writes this manuscript on the artist based on some ideas he'd picked up from reading Freud, who he'd never met. And then he gives this to Adler, the manuscript called The Artist. And Adler reads it and says, my goodness, this is really impressive. Let me show this to the professor. Adler was in Freud's
Circle.
circle.
Yes.
He was a member of the small group that met every Wednesday in Freud's apartment on Berggasse 19 in Vienna. So Adler delivers the manuscript to Freud, and Freud is totally blown away too. How could this young man who never went to high school understand me so well and write this manuscript on the artist, which used the word artist in just as strong a way as Freud had used the word sexuality in his writings? So Freud wrote a letter to Rank inviting him to come and visit. And there began at that time a 20-year
Mhm.
relationship between the two. Rank met Freud
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
the age of 21,
Hmm.
1905. Freud was 28 years older.
Hmm.
Freud was 49, almost 50 then. And Rank um, entered Freud's life and became virtually an adopted son. It
Yes.
was Freud was not impressed with his own three sons. He thought they were not intelligent or intellectual enough to follow in his footsteps. And therefore, he took a very paternal interest in Rank and
Hmm.
invited him in to his house, to his apartment, to his family for dinner, and eventually gave him a job,
Right.
paying job. So Otto Rank was the first paid member of the psychoanalytic movement. He became secretary to the what was later called the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society, which was the larger group that Freud was creating in Vienna to
Yes.
talk about his ideas.
Yes. Send him to school, sent him
Sent him to high school.
and yeah, and his PhD, yeah. Yes, yes.
And then he said, it's time for you to get a PhD, but I don't want you to get a medical degree because your knowledge of art and literature and philosophy and humanities is so good that I want you to be the non-medical expert
I see.
in psychoanalysis. Freud was a medical doctor, and everyone in his society was a doctor, except for another man named Hans Sachs, who was a lawyer. But Rank was tapped by Freud to become the expert on all the humanities, philosophy, literature, history, art, um, religion, and myth.
Right. Right. I can't help but feel as though because of the depth and breadth of Rank's sort of informal training,
Mhm.
that now that when you say that Freud was such a good writer of German that now it makes more sense to me. But given that he's already sort of made these ideological commitments, and I'm talking about Rank here, to like Schopenhauer and will and creativity, and he's identified the artist. Now, how does he fit himself into the Freudian school of system that to me feels almost like a straitjacket with its assumptions of like physical determinism and attempting to carve out a niche as a respectable, field in the hard sciences and so on and so forth. How do you think he managed that? And do you think there were conflicts there that, later play out? Or do you think the the work that Freud was doing was at least sufficient at the time to satisfy Rank's imagination?
Well, that's a great question. I really are asking something that requires a deeper exploration of the relationship between the two.
Yeah,
So, in my reading of Rank and Freud,
yeah,
their letters, which Jim Lieberman and I published in the
yes.
books, Freud was always very tolerant,
Mm,
not only tolerant, but actually encouraged Rank in some respects to disagree with him
hmm.
about uh, about what this new field called psychoanalysis was going to evolve into. So there was a tension between the two. Rank was the artist or the scholar of the humanities, philosophy, literature, myth, and so forth. Freud did never uh, claimed expertise in these areas.
Hmm. Hmm.
He was trained as a scientist in the late
All right.
19th century.
All right.
He was trained as a positivist. He was trained as a materialist. He had a lot of interest in literature and myth, not in philosophy, interesting. He always avoided it. But he liked the fact that this young man, who he had come out of nowhere and become part of the family, was filling the gap in his own
That
knowledge,
Buddha
you might say.
knowledge, right? Right. Right.
So there were disagreements between the two,
I see.
but they were done in a they exchanged their views in a very loving and supportive way. So Freud always accepted Rank's perspective. So he treated Rank as almost as an equal, which is
Hmm.
really very surprising because Freud didn't treat anybody else as an equal. Although there was a time when he tried to have that kind of relationship with Jung, that didn't last very long because Jung was not about to be an acolyte of Freud. He had his own views and philosophy and interests. But
Right.
with Rank, Freud was very, very generous. He funded his schooling, which must have taken a lot of money. He
Yeah.
paid his salary also, you know, and he constantly praised Rank in his own writings. As Otto Rank told me in a conversation we had about the myth of the birth of the hero, I believe the following. And this is the kind of quotation that you will find in Freud's writings.
Right.
So he recognized that this young man was somebody very special, and he wanted to do everything possible to support his growth and development and success,
Right. I,
even
I
if he might have disagreed on some, which they did for sure. They were not always in agreement, but they had tremendous affection and I would even say love for each other.
right. Right. I I that does clarify a few things in my mind as to how they would have a functional relationship and then again, there's just so many outlets for something like this, for this kind of interest, and I can imagine for Rank even to be associated and to have to be in a place where he can express his interests would do a lot for him, emotionally and psychologically. And interestingly, in the part of the book where you mention that they're falling apart, that last moment where Rand goes, you have the insight of a little boy, sort of, and Freud sort of replies along the lines of something along the lines of you're disingenuous.
You're an
Um,
imposter,
right.
imposter by nature. The German word is Hochstapler Natur. In
Yes.
other words, you're a con artist. You're a fake. You're a liar. That's what he called Ronk when
Mhm.
at the very end.
But in that, I almost feel as though because Rank is self-described. He describes himself as an actor, as he even, as you said, considered pursuing that. So I can see a Rank who is capable of fitting himself. Not in a way that I would go as far as to say is untruthful or not expressive of what he really feels. But within that training period where you're under the master's house, right? And Rank has to maintain this relationship, develop his own professional career, and so on and so forth, right? I could see a Rank who's able to navigate that with some diplomacy and some skill, and that falling apart may well be that moment where it all comes to a head, on both sides. So I thought that was rather interesting. Yes, yes. So there's another aspect, if I may. So in particular, if I know that I like the idea of the birth metaphor and viewing the psychoanalytic hour as you framed it very nicely, as sort of a gestation period or something, or of some sort for the psyche, and I think that's beautiful, and how Rank is able to see, oh, the client is ready to be born, and in that ambivalent period, he he prepares for it. The child doesn't stay in the womb indefinitely, and he encourages it when it ultimately happens. um
Mhm.
could you speak to that a bit?
Well, so this was the point on which Freud could no longer uh, be kind and generous to
Yes.
Ross. And this
Yes.
has to do with Freud's own difficulties with his own mother, as I write extensively in the book. I think I'm the first person to actually um, go deeply into this issue of Freud's unwillingness to analyze the power of his mother over
Hmm.
himself.
Hmm. Hmm.
I believe I'm the first person to actually have written this. I'm waiting for the other Freudian writers or others to, to either challenge me or to uh, accept it or respond in some way. Nobody has done it yet. So Rank seems to have, even as a very young man, at the age of 20, identified with with mother, with women,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly the pregnant
Mm-hmm.
woman. He seems to have seen the process of growing and developing through that metaphor. And therefore, it was natural for him when he became a full-time psychoanalyst, which didn't happen until about 1921. So remember, he came in 1905.
Mm-hmm.
Freud pretty much adopts him as a foster son, accepts him into his family, pays his way, and gives him all kinds of management and leadership roles in the movement. Frank is not a practicing therapist full time until about 1920 or 21. It's not clear when he started, but he had to do it because then he had a wife and a child, and he needed an income, and this was the only way he could do it. But even looking at his early writings, he's identifying with the uh, the birth giving metaphor of
Mm-hmm.
of um, human development. So you're interested in human development. You want to. You're writing about development. You're trying to find out in what ways AI can be an analog to that. I
Mm-hmm.
wish you well on that. I'm very interested in what you're going to end up with. But Ronk sees somehow because his wife is pregnant in
Right, right,
1919.
right, 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 right.
1919. So he is at that point um, in 1919. How old is he? He's 35. I think he's 35 years old at that time. And then he's completely astonished at what he sees. That he loves his wife, Tola. They're very, very intimate.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Freud did not have that kind of relationship with his own wife, Martha. They had a very strange uh, relationship. But Rank is close to his wife. She delivers in 1919, and then he tells Ernest Jones, they're on a trip somewhere. Oh, I think the most important relationship in life is between mother and child. Now, this is not something that is in anything that Freud had ever written.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Freud doesn't discuss this at all.
Mm-hmm.
He treats the father as the powerful ultimate authority in every child's life, and he has no role at all for mothers. This is quite shocking when you read about the way he saw human development at that time. Today, of course, everybody accepts Otto Rank's radical view that mothers
Right,
and
right.
children come first. Then the role of the father
Yeah.
becomes important. So this is obvious today. No one could even say, how could anybody have even questioned this? And yet it wasn't present. So
Yes.
he um, begins to be a therapist, and he sees that this is the same kind of role that he's going to be placed in. That he's
The
giving,
midwife. Yes,
in a
yes,
sense, he's the midwife. He uses the metaphor midwife. I'm the midwife for the birth of a new soul, a new self,
yes,
uh,
yes.
who has energy, vitality, and life, and is um, hopeful and dreams and wants to create something. So he now sees himself through that lens, and therefore his whole practice um, follows in that direction.
Yes. I find it
Freud,
very interesting that it's Rank's own openness and relationship with his wife that
yeah,
and his own child being born that kind of revivifies that metaphor in his thinking, and you see that, you know,
it
that
was always there. If you read
yes.
his diary, I quoted something that he wrote when he was 20, which
Mhm.
was It's just amazing. This is 20 years old. I love this quote. Would like to just read a
Please
few
take
words
your
of it.
time. Take your time. Yeah.
He writes this in 1904 when he's 20 years old. 20 years old, he writes in his journal, I can now approximately picture the growth of the child in the mother's body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's using his imagination,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
also the emotions and sensations of the mother. Once again, he's using what today we call empathy. He already has that when he's 20 years old. Then he adds, I often do not know at all for a long time that I am carrying something around with me. He's talking about his writing,
Yes.
like
Yes.
an embryo. So this is not a new idea, but it becomes very palpable with his own birth of his own child and his full-time practice as a therapist, beginning
Yes.
approximately 1920 or 21.
Yes. Well, you're giving me a lot to work with here. I I think the difficulty in these conversations is that we talk about things like the birth metaphor and empathy and the mother and the child, and it's that it's more so that the metaphors that we use and that we gravitate towards reflect sort of the worldviews in general, right? So if the mother is important and the birth canal and all of these things are important, then how you look at the psychic development and going through, periods of difficulty and so on, and how you view those become very different. And I think for an audience member that probably isn't able to see what we're intimating at here, it's that fact that your whole worldview is determined to some extent by the metaphor that you use for describing each of these phenomena.
Very good point. So, how we see human life, human experience, is is through our own lens, our own framework, our own mindset. We call it now.
Yeah.
And Freud saw uh, human life through the father lens,
Hmm.
not through the mother lens, and Rank saw it through the mother lens. Would not does not mean he ignores the father. Freud actually accuses him in a letter. So I think I know why you are avoiding or abandoning the role of the father. It has to do with your own history with your own father. And Rank answers, that's absurd. I'm not. I'm just giving the father the right place. Number two. And number one is the mother. And
Yeah.
that is not something Freud was ever willing to accept.
Yes. 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 Hmm. Hmm. Well, and I also appreciated when you sort of highlighted the relationship Freud had with his own mother with regards to how her own passing affected his we could call development and being able to express certain ideas that he was like less open to before, and how Rank mentioned that it seems like the old man is finally coming around to being able to discuss certain things.
Oh,
That was quite insightful.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I make it very personal. So this is a story that is not particularly abstract. It's not abstract at all. It's not highly intellectualized. I made it as personal as I could because these two people, Otto Rank and Sigmund Freud, had a deep personal relationship. And
Right.
in my estimation, I don't think they could possibly have broken that relationship except on an issue that Freud was had buried in his own unconscious. That is to say, his own ambivalence, hate, love, fear of his own mother. Um, so I made it personal. Some people will challenge that. Well, you can't do that because that doesn't seem right, but I think it is. I think it has to do with they had a personal relationship of
Right.
Rank and Freud, and therefore it had to have been deeply, deeply personal when they broke.
Yes. Yes. And I think yeah, I found it quite convincing, the kind of parallels that you drew there. And of course the image was really the kicker, where Freud is locking arms with his mom, and clearly mom is in the lead. And yes, I enjoyed that.
Let me
If
show this to your audience because
yes, please. Yes,
it's
please.
so shocking. I remember when I first saw this picture.
Yeah.
I don't know, can you see it?
Yes, here we can see. Yes, 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 yes. Mom is Freud is,
Okay.
and the way he would visit her every Sunday
He was
begrudgingly, and
he always
get
came
his head
late.
cast. Yeah, yes, yes,
He it's a tragic story if you really I uh, define it as a tragic story, as something that Freud was suffered from and was unable to ever to acknowledge or work through. And so he lived a tormented life as a
yes,
result. And then eventually he was diagnosed with cancer, cancer of the jaw and the upper palate. He had to have his right part of his uh, cheek removed. So there was a hole in his mouth, so to speak. And he suffered tremendously from this cancer. And he himself said at one point that cancer is due to hatred in the unconscious. So
mhm,
somehow part of him knew what was happening, but the other part refused ever to deal with it. And therefore he was uh, torn, tormented the rest of his life.
yes, um, yes. If we may, and in part, this is because when you mentioned the idea that this is a deeply personal story, and the way I see these, how they develop their theories is in large part these are artistic individuals, and their life story and their work are very much intertwined at these, how they express themselves. And I think
Right.
in Rank's book, Art and Artists, and specifically where, if I may, he discusses the fact that from his view, the the artist is, to say, 100% has 100% vocational psychology. And he says the creative type nominates itself at
Mhm.
once as an artist, and that in the artist type, the creative urge is constantly related to his ego, um, to a fuller measure than in the average man. Um, and For whereas the average man uses his calling chiefly as a means to material existence and psychically only so far as to enable himself to feel a member of society, the artist needs his calling for his spiritual existence. For the artist, therefore, his calling is not a means of livelihood, but life itself. Does that speak to you with regards to how these men live their lives, how they express themselves through their work, and what vocation meant for them?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
So Freud has been seen, interpreted by almost everyone as a scientist,
Yes.
but he wasn't. He was an artist.
Yes.
That's what
Yes.
makes him so great.
Hmm.
His his ability to spin stories that
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
seduce readers and keep them constantly coming back to rereading Freud's case histories or his essays or his other books. So he's an artist, and Freud lived it to the hilt. He
Hmm.
wanted what all artists want, according to Ron, immortality.
Hmm. Hmm.
And his tragedy is that he thought that he had to pose as a scientist to get that immortality. When the truth is, if he had never entered medicine or become a therapist, just by the nature of his writings, he would have achieved great fame, renown, and immortality. So that's the tragedy of Freud, that he kept insisting that what he was doing was empirical and scientific and medical, but really he was creating his own world, his own cosmos, the Freudian cosmos, and he projected that onto everybody else in the world.
Yes.
So if we had seen Freud as an artist, people would not be so angry at him for the destruction that he wreaked on the patients that he and other analysts harmed. So that's the downside of Freud, that the wreckage he left in his wake has dragged him down. Even though in the first half of the 20th century, even up to about 1970 or so, he was considered a giant in the field of science and therapy, and considered one of the most influential persons in the 20th century, along with Darwin
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
and Marx. But the second half of the 20th century, beginning of roughly about 1980 or so, his reputation just took a dive
Yeah.
because the historians had gotten access to many of his papers. His original notes for his cases didn't match
I
what he
see.
wrote. In other words, he was inventing details and claiming successes in his therapy, which he never achieved.
All right.
He was a fraud in that sense.
Bad sign. Bad signs. But
But
would
he was a genius in terms of the of his ability to persuade other people. His
mhm.
his, his literary gifts were unparalleled. If he had only kept it that way, his reputation today would still be soaring, but it's not.
But is it fair to say that Freud, and you say tragedy, and that does ring true to me, but the tragedy main part be that to lend legitimacy to psychology and psychiatry as a science, he sort of had to, that was sort of his cross to carry, um, to establish what we have today, which is where we consider, okay, psychology, psychiatry, these things are within the medical domain, within the realm of science, and so on. Or are you saying that a purely, you know, artistic approach would have been sufficient? Because I'm not quite sure about that.
Well, I don't know. So, I mean, the whole field of psychiatry is torn apart by uh, contradictions and bad results.
Yes.
You now see that the great claims for SSRIs were exaggerated. They came out about 1980, 81. The whole psychiatric profession changed into becoming biological psychiatry. So it's linked very closely now to the brain
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
to neurons. Uh, but
Yeah, we
uh,
have the reproducibility crisis and so on. I'm aware that in terms of, general science, there's a
very serious problem that you can't reproduce those results, which means that somebody was fiddling with the
right,
data when
right.
they first were published. That's the unfortunate truth. So psychiatry and of all the medical professions is the least respected.
Hmm.
It's at the bottom of the list. You have great medical achievements over the last 50 years and continue to be truly amazing, but psychiatry has had none.
Yeah.
Everything that's been proposed has fallen by the wayside and been seen to be an exaggeration or a deception.
That's yes, yes. I think that's quite interesting, and it reflects something about the human psyche and creativity in general, and so on and so forth. Perhaps it's not the right domain, or it probably just doesn't fit into the scientific straitjacket. The assumptions of determinism, so on and so forth, might simply be inappropriate. But yeah, if because I know there's not a lot of time, but I would like to, if possible, talk about a bit more detail about when Rank outlines his three categories of individuals and get a sense of how you feel about those. So he has the notion
Mm.
of the average individual, and then he talks about the productive type, the artistic type, the he's able to express himself, and the neurotic type, which he sees as the failed artist, the artist mank. The mank, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but um, what do you think about these categorizations? Um, do they apply today? Uh, yeah, yeah. Does it help in terms of how we see other people, how we see ourselves, and so on and so forth?
So he does have these three categories.
Yeah.
Average, I'm not exactly sure what average is. I've never fully understood that category, but the other two are more
Yes. Yes.
attractive to me. The artist and the one who wants to be creative and wants to be uh, produce something out of their life, but is unable to do so and creates the neurosis, the
Hmm.
illness instead.
Hmm.
That's what he calls the neurotic.
Right.
So neurotic, he says, that's a term that's not used anymore by psychiatrists. They took it out of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, about 1991, I think. So in the literature, rarely will you see the word neurotic anymore. They have a whole list of 50 or 70 or I don't know, 100 every year, the number
Neuroses. Sure.
increases of different diagnoses. I
Yeah.
don't think that's helpful either. But I like the two categories of artist and non-artist, so to speak.
Yeah.
About the average, I don't think Rank was very interested in that one, and I don't think he wrote much on that at all. He did define it that way,
Yes.
but he's not spending time on that. He loves thinking about exploring the greatness and the suffering of artists. He loves that. That's what his book Art and Artist is about. It's about the
Yes.
height
Right here.
of creativity
Yeah.
and the discontents
Yes.
being creative. It's such a magnificent book that has not been rivaled. I don't know any other book that comes even close to that one. And
It
almost
is
everybody accepts.
incredibly dense, incredibly dense.
It's a very dense book because he knows everything about all the arts. He knows
Yeah,
about archaeology, he knows about painting and sculpture
music.
and
Yes.
architecture and myth and religion and philosophy. And he's just constantly referring to
Yeah.
these, and people can't catch up with
Yeah.
him. He just
Yeah.
perhaps certainly mistakenly assumed that other people had read the same things he'd read, which is not the case.
Yeah.
So the artist he seems to have illuminated the psychology of the artist better than anybody ever did.
Hmm.
And when artists read that book, I've talked to some artists, they say, I'm amazed at how he's able to talk to me about my
Yes.
own frustrations and disappointments and joys and exhilaration and depression and anxiety. He knows me. That's what they
Yes.
say.
Yes. And he goes as far as to talk about the not only the beginnings of the artist, so when they self-nominate or they decide, okay, I'm going to pursue a particular field, but how like success and how
Success
sort of
and
like
fame. Yeah,
right
yeah.
and how that those things,
How
yeah, yeah,
how success and fame both desired and unwanted by
self-defeating.
the
Yes.
artist. It's just an unbelievably fascinating description, and you could see it if you just look at people like Bob Dylan.
Hmm.
Uh, his tormented relationship to his success. All great artists seem to have some sort of a resistance to their own fame because, as Rank says, the audience co-opts it, takes away the immortality of the
And fame is
artist.
what you get in return, and maybe that's not
All
good
they
enough.
give you is fame, but I
Yeah.
don't want that. I want to live forever.
Yeah. 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 And I
Yeah.
thought that
So
that was interesting because he also says the kind of when artists are accused. of what does he say? By the non-productive types, he says, by individuals that might be or non-vocational in the sense. You know, you make music just for the fame, and then people project that viewpoint onto artistic types. And it's not that it was never about that. You know, it was the process itself, and it's a vocation, right? It's something of a calling.
100%. That's right. So Rank says it's your entire life. If you
Right.
really devote yourself to becoming a great artist, not just somebody who paints on the weekends or
Yeah.
fixes
Or is
cars,
trying to make a buck from his
right?
art. Yeah.
All that is creativity, and that's all wonderful, and he supports it all. But he's talking there about the greatest artists, Michelangelo, people
Hmm.
like Leonardo,
Hmm.
um,
Goethe.
Picasso.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what that book is about. Great art. You should have called it Great Art and Great Artists, something like
Right.
that.
You're right. You're
Would have
right.
made it more clear what he was interested in.
Yeah. Um, if I may, there is a relationship between artistry and heroism. And
Yeah.
he sort of outlines that, or I think Ernest Becker sort of better outlines that. I'm curious to know any reactions you might have to this. And Ernest Becker is a bit more extreme in this, but he says the whole thing boils down to this paradox. If you're going to be a hero, you must give a gift. If you're the
Mhm.
average man, you give your heroic gift to the society in which you live, and
Mhm.
you give the gift that society specifies in advance. If you're an artist, you fashion a peculiarly personal gift, the justification of your own heroic identity, which means that it is always aimed at least partly over the heads of your fellow men. Does that does that relationship between art and heroism is a
Yeah.
curious one. Um, I'm pretty sure you've thought about this. What hints can you give me with regards to connecting those two ideas?
Well, Rank was always fascinated with the myth of the birth of the hero. That
Hmm.
was
Hmm.
uh, his second book. Well, actually, I think he published that. Did he publish that before The Artist? I can't remember.
I
Anyway,
believe it before, yes. Yeah.
I think it was 1905 he published that book. It's an amazing book. Somehow he managed to get a list of, of all the great hero myths of
Uh-huh.
Western civilization. I also think he talks about Eastern as well, but not as much. And so the hero is the artist. There's no
Right.
doubt. There's a direct line from the myth of the birth of the hero through the trauma of birth
Hmm.
through to art and artist. And he even has a chapter on the hero in Art and Artist. So he's always thinking about this. So what does it mean to be to give a gift that's above the heads of the society
Yeah.
society in which you're in? I don't know what that means.
Yeah. Yeah.
According to Becker, it seems to mean that you drop a gift into the mystery of existence, the
Uh-huh.
universe.
Uh-huh.
Somehow,
Uh-huh.
that's the last sentence of Ernest Becker's book. The artist or the hero drops something, part of themselves or some product, into the creative force of the universe.
Mhm.
And if you know, they do expect some recognition of it, but Becker is saying that sometimes they do it without expecting anything at all. It's just the gift that they give. So that's beyond me. I don't fully grasp what Ernest
Rank,
Becker was
even
thinking.
before Becker, Rank is saying that many a time the artist, and Rank is case in point, he's having a premonition here, is not appreciated in their time. And we see that across genres, right? The music is appreciated after the death or the scientific finding and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah, so
Um,
that's a good point. I think that's a very, very good point. There's so many of, so even somebody like uh, Van Gogh.
All right.
Yep, Van Gogh was not appreciated. I don't think he sold any painting
Nope.
even when he was living. And
Nope.
there are many, many such great artists.
Hmm.
So what does it mean if you're dead and the world has decided that you are so fantastic that we're going to write books about you, make movies, build museums to house your work? If you're dead,
Yeah.
what? So I think the answer to that question is that the greatest artist is giving a gift, and Becker does mention this, to God, to
Hmm.
the mystery of the universe.
Beyond. Yes.
He's not talking about any personal God or theistic version of it. It's to the, and I'm very interested in the subject, and I write about it in the last two chapters of my book. Um, the fantastic, incomprehensible, awesome mystery of existence.
Hmm.
That here we are, we've been born at a certain point, a date. We have a limited amount of time. It's a split second
Hmm.
relative to the vast
Right.
time.
Between two eternities. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's 13.8 billion years,
Hmm.
according to most cosmologists, uh, from the time of the Big Bang to the present. I don't know what 13.8 billion means. I can barely go past five or six. I can handle five. Six, I already have trouble with six. I only have five hands, five fingers.
Yeah.
Maybe I can get to 10, but
Yeah.
13.8 billion? And
Yeah.
then you look at the pictures coming back from NASA's space shots, the various Voyager and other um, uh, um, satellites that go up, and they're mind-boggling. They leave me speechless. So we are little specks of
Right.
dust on a tiny, insignificant planet that is not much bigger than a speck of dust itself, that
Hmm.
is rotating, spinning around a slightly larger speck of dust called the sun. And that's our existence in this incredible space
Right.
of infinite time and infinite space, apparently. So our lives are, who are we? Who am I? I am nothing.
We are.
And the artist creates something
Yes.
to deposit into that space and leave a mark, leave like a, like a, I was here.
Right. Right. The causes
Rembrandt says,
project. Yeah.
as I see, I was here.
Yeah.
I was here. I made a difference. Yes. 99.99999% of all human beings who've ever existed have been forgotten.
Yeah. And
That's a
it's
shock. That's a shock to people if you really let it sink in.
yes. Yes. That is it's like you say, it's like small, minuscule, organisms, and the artist is railing against existence itself, just, you
Well,
know.
not railing, but almost celebrating it. So, in a
Mm,
sense,
mm,
I think what Bach did, or what Michelangelo, Leonardo, or even modern painters like Picasso, or writers like Samuel Beckett, poets, musicians, and others, they are they want to be remembered.
yeah.
That's their immortality.
But so this is where I almost feel as though there's a contention between Becker's sort of worldview and what Rank. When you said celebrating, I much prefer that sort of optimistic view. Whereas when Becker emphasizes this notion of causa sui and immortality project and so on, that to me sounds more like the resistance as opposed to sort of this Rankian expression of vitality of self, of the celebratory thing. And in reading Rank, um, I felt as though it was a worldview that aligns with what you just said right now, and something that feels more feels like the kind of thought process that lends for a better life experience, as opposed to this uh there's an end and I must do something. In that meantime.
Yeah.
Um,
So a debate among the people who took Ernest Becker's work seriously. There's a whole, of course, there's an experimental research group,
yeah, right. The terror management. Yes, sure, sure, sure.
better management theory, which is published over 1,500 experimental studies on
Mhm.
the consequences of the fear of death or the denial of death in
Like for
terms of
in group
uh,
coherence and so on and so forth. Yes.
coherence and creation of culture and religion, ways to buffer or deny that the end is the fate of every human being. So there's a debate in this group of people. On the one hand, some believe that Becker was deeply pessimistic and had a
Yes.
dark
Yes.
view and was very
Well, his last book for me really didn't land, because I felt as though I like he moves away from rank more and more. I almost feel as though, and you get this pessimism, as you say, that becomes increasingly incoherent, almost. Um, Maybe that's saying too much, but I do feel as though he's almost describing the death drive, and maybe that is a real thing. But this life tension that Rank also emphasizes, I think he de-emphasizes in speaking about the causes sui and immortality and terror management as well, right? Um, so that's sort of
yeah. So the two poles here. Some people feel that he was dark, pessimistic, and very um, didn't see
yeah. Any
anything
light?
positive,
Yeah,
any
yeah,
light.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now I fall in the other camp, and
Hmm.
I think that he did have a very optimistic and glowing view of, for example, he was a very devoted family man. So I happen to be good friends with his widow, Marie
Hmm.
Becker. I've known her
Hmm.
for 25 years. And she tells me he was a loving father, a devoted husband. He played the guitar, uh, to relax. So he had a very positive outlook on life. And then, of course, he was working furiously to finish this book, The Denial of
Yes.
Death, which he felt very ill as he was writing it. I don't think he had been diagnosed with his um, cancer. I think he
Hmm.
had cancer of the stomach, I believe it was. I'm not sure 100%, but and so he worked furiously on it. And she told me he used to work late at night, like you were working late at night. 4 o'clock in the morning, he'd be spending typing away. There was no laptops at the time. He had to
Yes.
type it, and he exhausted himself. He drained himself to finish the book, The
Yes.
Denial of Death. And later, he took out of it the,
Yes.
the, the book called Escape from Evil. So that was
Yes.
originally part of The Denial of Death.
I really enjoyed this book, by the way, and I think the things he highlights are aversion to the reality of our immortality, of our mortality, and so on and so forth. Absolutely important, and as an entryway into rank, it's still very dense, frankly,
Very,
but yeah, I very much
very profound book that is
yes,
continuing to interest people, and people are drawn to it. So it seems like it's not going away. That book is a lasting contribution by
yes,
Ernest Becker to the uh, way to human thought, you might say.
yes, and his homage that he gives to rank, I don't. remember precisely, but he gives a glowing. He says
Of
rank is the
Ron.
most. Oh yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah, he just says you can't get enough of
yeah,
Rank.
yeah. That's what he said. Yeah,
No substitute for reading Rank. He's a mine for years of insight and pondering. That's what he
yeah,
said, which
yeah,
happens to be true.
yeah.
I did spend
4 decades.
40 years approximately mining Otto Rank. That's the book that I published is the outcome of my 40 years of
Amazing.
reading, rereading, trying to make sense of uh, looking at how I can make him more readable, more understandable.
What are some of your favorite Otto Rank books?
Will Therapy, which is now out of print, sadly, is truly a dazzling work
That
of
I
not
haven't
just
read it.
therapy, but of philosophy and of it is truly a life-changing book. I've read it many times. Truth and Reality
Oh
also
yeah,
is a small book, but
yeah.
also absolutely
It's a
stunning.
gem. Yeah, it's a gem. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And I
Uh,
like my book. So I think that you could read my book and get a taste of
yeah.
what Otto Rank is able to offer you. I certainly don't, I'm not able to capture everything. He's beyond me. You know, he's far he's far more spacious than I'm able to be. So what I wrote is a reflection of me, and there's a me. I am in it, so to speak, because I chewed over Ronk's books and came out with this result.
But perhaps from the little I've read, your book is probably the most approachable rank book out to date.
I think
In
so.
terms of in terms of, you
Yeah,
know,
it is.
yeah,
Nothing else like it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. A
well,
bit
that's my contribution, my little
your
deposit into the life force. I
yes.
published a book.
If in the interest of time and because I think before we close there's just two or three things that I'd like to one is Rank posits ideas about the beyond. And I know this it gets the air is thin up here. But
Yeah,
to if we can give it a try. And he says in Beyond Psychology, his last book, I don't even think he finished it, right? If I'm not mistaken. This was
very close to finishing it, but
right.
you can say it was finished.
Right.
It's
And
complete.
the only book I think he wrote in English, right?
The only book he wrote.
He says in a wonderful preface where he's very frank about not having the answers. And this is why I also like him a lot. He's not begging for your transference. He's not pretending that he's got it. But in that you get many more answers. He says, we're born in pain, we die in pain. So, the psychiatrist can't help you to some extent. And we accept life pain as unavoidable, indeed, a necessary part of earthly existence, not merely the price we have to pay for pleasure. This book is an attempt to picture human life, not only as I have studied it in its many forms for more than a generation, but as I have achieved it for myself, an experience beyond the compulsion to change it according to any man-made ideology. Then he says, man is born beyond psychology and he dies beyond it, but he can live beyond it only through vital experience of his own, in religious terms, through revelation, conversion, or rebirth. What is Rank saying? You know,
Well, so I went into his papers at Columbia University, and I found a little piece of paper where he was drafting the preface. He drafted it a couple of times. And on this paper, he had written not exactly what you read, but more personal. And I put this in the epigram for the
right, the
book.
first part of the book. Yes, yes, you
So
open.
what he wrote there, what he wrote on this piece of paper, which he didn't publish, was very personal. And then he said, I was born beyond, he didn't say man was born. He said, I was born beyond psychology and want to die beyond it.
Yes.
But first and foremost, I want to live beyond it.
Hmm.
And formerly, it has been in my way.
Yes. And he has that little, you put the asterisk or the, yes, you put, you cite it. Right. Right.
Yeah. And so it comes from his papers. And that's a very personal statement. He's talking, of course, about Freud, psychoanalysis. I was born beyond Freud,
All right. Man-made ideologies. Yes.
man-made ideologist, and I want to die beyond it. He's writing this in September 1939. He actually died 1 month later. He didn't know
Yes.
he was going
Same
to
year as
die.
Freud, which is is eerie, very eerie. Yeah.
He died 1 month after Freud. 1 month.
Yeah.
Freud was 83 and Rank was 55.
Yes.
He got sick. Freud died of suicide, physician assisted suicide.
Hmm. Hmm.
And Rank died as a result of reaction to a drug. He had a kidney infection, and they gave him a certain drug before penicillin had been introduced. That was introduced in World War II, and he had a reaction to the drug he was given, and he died from that reaction. So what he's saying there is that I don't want to live. I don't want to live on my past. I don't want to be seen as just an extension of Freud. Freud dominated my life. That's what he's
Yes.
saying. Dominates many people's lives. He dominated most of the 20th century. But I want to live. He says, I want to live. And so it's very poignant. And he's talking about the beyond, of course. And that's what I did my epilogue in the book. I wrote about
Yes.
the beyond.
Yes. I so I in sort of attempting to grok this beyond and seeing where rank might be coming from, especially in this book, and not in contradistinction to Freud. So just rank the man when he says in religious and I believe when he was younger he said something along the lines of philosophy is individualized religion and religion is generalized um personal philosophy or something along those lines. um but when he says through revelation, conversion, or rebirth, and then throughout the
Mhm.
book we get him contending with Judaism and Christianity. And in his own life, you have periods of conversion for pragmatic purposes, like name change when he goes from Rosenfeld, I believe, to Rank and then back again. Um and even in his critique or his attempt at psychologizing what the Judaic mindset is versus the Christian mindset. And then when he closes with eros versus agape, right? And the need for both. Um, do those and then in my mind, I think of eros as sort of this paternalistic thing, and agape is more this sort of feminine yielding capacity. And he says they're both, necessary. And of course, this harkens back to Nietzsche and the Apollonian and the Dionysian, and the fact that he's doing he has that the background which prevents him from falling into any dead end, as which Freud probably isn't lucky enough to have. Um, if at all, does this reflect on his own potential conversion experience? Does this reflect on some kind of religious affiliation that he might have had in writing this, or in deciding to use those words? Because those are not, you don't use words like conversion or religious lightly. At this point, we're not even talking about his fight with Freud. This feels to me even more significantly personal.
Yeah, so I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
I do know I once had a lunch with his daughter, Helena. She's died. died about 25 years ago. And Jim Lieberman was there too. And she was telling stories about their life in Paris. So she was very young. She was born in 1919. They moved to Paris in 1926. And so she says, we did not practice any religious faith during the years there. And she went to, I think she went to a Catholic school, actually.
Mhm.
It was a good
Mhm.
school. And Jim Lieberman always told me that he thought Ronk had no religious beliefs whatsoever. So Jim himself is strongly anti-religion. So he identified with that, and he assumed that Ronk also would have done that. I don't know the answer to the question.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're
I mean,
right. So you use a word like conversion. That's a religious word. Well, also could mean conversion to a different ideology, a different belief system,
it
which is
could,
not
it
necessarily
could.
religion.
But then when he goes, he's freely attempting in an age where it's probably a bit more dangerous to do so, like, professionally. He feels open and feels strongly enough to even attempt to psychoanalyze these religions. I mean, a mind like Freud, I mean, a man like either Freud or Rank is, of course, too expensive to fit into any religion, I'd argue. I mean, these guys are,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't simplify them to that extent. But I'm interested in seeing what potential ideas are lurking behind that. It's more of an exploratory question, just the probing.
Well, I hope you continue to explore that
Yeah.
and write something yourself about this subject. It appears to be close to your heart. So I encourage you
Yes.
to go through Beyond Psychology, which is the most extensive writing Ron did on religion. As far as I don't think he did it anywhere else, but he writes a lot about Christianity
Hmm.
in this book that he never touched on in
Yeah.
any other book. So
Yeah.
something was going on in him. I don't know.
Yeah.
We can't really say what because he didn't leave any traces of it other than this book, which shows a complete fascination with the development of
Paul.
Christianity.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Well, he knows the New Testament seemingly totally. He studied it, which is it's really quite amazing in
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Very, very, very interesting. Because I think it's a kind of a interesting topic to kind of sort of head towards a close. There's a
Mhm.
there's a word that you've used earlier and that I've seen cropping up across these books, and
Mhm.
it's a word that I find very interesting for my own personal studies, and this is with regards to developmental psychology. And I should note, I was another thinker and writer that I like a lot is Jean Piaget, the French developmental psychologist, and
Yeah.
Rank, it appears, he was of course contemporaries, but also was in contact with Piaget, and Rank emphasizes the notion of genetics, genetic psychology or
Mhm.
developmental
Yeah.
psychology, right?
Developmental. Yeah, that's what
Right.
it's about. Developmental psychology. Yeah.
Right, but I see Rank as doing the interior emotional landscape and how that developmentally evolves over time, whereas Piaget is sort of doing this more cognitive
Yeah.
information processing style. But I think they both can learn a lot from each other, and I don't think Rank fleshes out much of a real developmental psychology moving from a child all the way up to adulthood, but
Mhm.
there's clearly intimations of that, which I find also quite fascinating. But I mean, of course, feel free to as I kind of look through to find what I wanted to. He says, okay, so there's and the word just not keep you waiting is vitality. So in Becker's book, he closes by saying, even more it comes from, and he's talking about the progress of man. It comes from the vital energies of the masses of men sweating within the nightmare of creation, and it is not even in man's hand to program. He's talking about what you consider the universe being creative and moving forward. And even in Rank's book, he closes by in Beyond Psychology, he closes by saying by talking about, I think it was it Art and Artist. He speaks about vitality in closing his book as well. So this term vitality um as a very good description of the life, sort of what the fair of life is about and what that positive creative energy might be. Is that something that you find interesting? And I don't know if you could speak to that in general.
Well, the fear of life is really a fascinating proposition, and
Mm,
I really get it. I felt it and still do. The fear of being alive
yeah.
and being a nothingness, a speck. Like I said, that's what we are. That's terrifying. That's what the terrifying aspect is for. I think Becker uses that word. Um, and yet we're also vital. We're also alive. We are alive, even though we are nothing. And
Hmm.
so Rank contrasts the hero who soars, basically soars into the cosmos with their feelings of creativity and vitality and energy and the religious view. So actually, I quote this, and this is really a good point. Rank is not ever uh, ignoring the other side, So let me find this little
Yes, take
passage.
your-
Ah, yes. So Rank talks about both the will and the feeling of guilt for uh, being alive, almost. Talk about existential guilt. This is the way I wrote about it on page 167. Willing and guilt feeling define the greatness and limits of a flesh and blood mortal who is both creator and creature. Not just creator, we're also a piece of dust, artist and worm.
hmm Very Becker, very Becker. Yes.
We're food for, we're
Food for
worm
worms.
food.
Yes.
That's what he
Yeah.
says. Whose awareness of being alive, that's the vitality. My awareness of being alive is split, writes Rank in Truth and Reality. And here's the quote from Rank: wavering between his godlikeness and his nothingness, whose will is awakened to knowledge of its power,
Hmm.
but whose consciousness is aroused to terror before it. The heroic myth strives to justify this creative will through glorifying its deeds, while religion reminds man that he himself is but a creature dependent on cosmic forces. So you
Brilliant.
see, it's really just a beautiful statement. This is Rank, not Becker. Becker got the idea from
Oh, I know.
Rank.
Of course, of course, of course.
It's the hero, the artist, the giant who loves life, is vital, energized, creative, pouring out all kinds of things, whether it's paintings, music, writing, sculpture, science. All these people are artists for Rank. Einstein is an artist.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
also remembers this is the humanity of Rank, his humility in the face of the vastness of the cosmos that can never be fully understood,
Mm.
and realizes that we are religion reminds man that he himself is but a creature dependent on cosmic forces. So Rank doesn't seem to be opposed to religion. I don't think he wants it to accept it or have it as any kind of ideology. It's for sure not. But he does understand its value, its its truth, you might say,
Mm.
without advocating any specific religion, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, or anything else. He understands that it is a part of human existence, both the greatness and the nothingness of
Hmm.
human. So it's a
Yeah.
beautiful statement, it seems to me.
Yes.
And he sees these two aspects working out in all great works of art, whether it's Bach or painting by Rembrandt. I see it in Rembrandt. You see Rembrandt's self-portrait. I mean, it's so human, but also so great at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
The greatest artists are the ones who can balance somehow the heroism and the uh, insignificance.
Yeah. The humanness, the
It's
yeah. Yeah.
phenomenal.
I appreciate that. Yeah. 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 I think this was a great just I think we did the whole gamut. I think we had some really good particular moments, some a good overview, um lots of food for thought. So well, thank you
Okay.
for joining me today. I think we learned a lot about rank. And I can just imagine that people are very much excited to read your book and learn more. And if
Thank you for inviting me. I learned a lot in this conversation that I appreciate very much.
great, and maybe we'll have you back on sometime soon before
Please,
yeah.
let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.